Hi guys, and welcome to the latest MSC Performance Podcast with me, Mark, and today I'm joined by Mr. Luke Rogers. How you doing, Luke?
I'm good, mate. I am very good. Enjoying the weather. I had my cold brew from St. Kitchen. Use code Luke10 if you want 10% off. Best cold brew in town.
Wish I knew that. Got the Barbell Club stash on as well.
Yep, we've got some new t-shirts ready to launch. So if you're interested in getting a Barbell Club t-shirt to represent the gym and represent the Barbell Club, they're available now. You can try them on in the gym. You can try all the colours, see what you like best. And I think they're £15.
Yeah, all the colours. We've got black or grey. But we've got some in stock now, guys. So we've obviously got our online shop, but we've also got some in stock.
In-house.
So yeah. Happy days.
Second plug, Metcon Games.
Yeah.
2.0 is coming the 31st of July.
Yeah, absolutely. Like last year was a massive success. So yeah, Metcon Games 2.0, July the 31st. It's going to be a big day. It's going to be a big competition during the day. Very friendly, very relaxed. All ability levels welcome.
Yeah, one thing to say is people are getting a little bit worried that they're not quite at a level to do the games, but it's very it can be catered to every single person. It's a very mixed level of people that are doing it, so there's not going to be anyone that would do it that would be massively out of place. So if you're thinking about doing it and you're getting put off because you don't think you're quite good enough, please don't let that put you off, because it's a very mixed level of people. The events are going to be very easily scalable, so it's just going to be a good fun, a little bit competitive, but the emphasis is mainly on the fun.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, so any ability levels welcome. It's just about coming down, having a good laugh, good social,
and maybe meeting other people that you don't normally get to train with, because we all train at different times.
Exactly. So looking for it to be a really big day. So like I say, if you're even thinking about competing, just do it. Just get your name in the hat. And if you want to come down and watch, the more support, the more people, the merrier. It's going to be a big social. It's kind of in line to celebrate our 6th birthday. So it's actually this Sunday that will be our 6th birthday officially on the 13th of June. But we're going to be using that opportunity with the Metcon Games on the 31st of July to celebrate our 6th birthday. So we'll have the Metcon Games during the day. We're yet to finalise times, but it's going to be roughly about sort of 10 till 2, I think. Yeah. We'll stick around for a quick drink afterwards, and then we're going to book somewhere out in the evening and get a good social and a bit of a session in the evening.
Absolutely. Maybe at the Actress and the Bishop.
Let's see what happens. Get yourselves involved, guys. So moving on to talk about the podcast for today. So we're going to talk a little bit about conditioning. Conditioning, why we do it, how we can do it, and when to do it as well. So nice bit of in-depth work. And chat around that subject. So, do you want to sort of intro to the guys, Luke, as to what conditioning is, and a little bit of chat about energy systems, output, capacity stuff?
Sure. Conditioning is a very vague term. It could mean a lot of things, and it's going to mean a lot of different. It's going to mean different to a lot of people. If you're a sports athlete, conditioning is going to be very sport specific to what you're doing. We obviously do the Metcon, which is a more general conditioning-based session. For that one, we like to keep it nice and simple, where we have our output work, which is more based around developing your speed and power qualities. And there's lots of different protocols that we use for that. But it's very much focused around like your alactate work, which is short periods of high intensity, but needs a lot of recovery work. So that's why in the sessions you're seeing like 6 to 12 seconds of work with about anywhere from like 40 to up to like a minute, 2 minutes of recovery, really trying to prioritize your output. The second half is more of your capacity, which is developing your aerobic work. Capacity, as it's saying, is building up your capacity, building up your base of aerobic fitness. So more sustainable amount of work, trying to keep a decent amount of work up without a drop off in speed. So examples of that would be long periods of work with shorter recovery, because the aerobic system isn't quite as demanding and doesn't require as much recovery work to sustain the effort.
Yeah, I think the big thing for people is, if they've come into the gym and they're doing Metcons and they're not used to working with high output for short periods of time, that can be a really strange kind of feeling and transition, because I think a lot of people have done aerobic stuff before, whether that's like running or on the bike or anything like that. But like, just, I think just a little bit of extra emphasis on the timings of things, like you say, with the high intensity work and some of the alactate work, in the Metcon classes, we do work that's between, like you say, 6 and 12 seconds. And then with that, it's a longer recovery because we're looking to work at high power output, as hard as we can for that short period of time. It is very taxing, and then we want the longer recoveries so that we can try and repeat that kind of same intensity. If we're doing 6 to 12 seconds as hard as we can, and then we're resting for 10 seconds or 15 seconds or 20 seconds and then trying to go again, we're not going to repeat that same kind of power output. And I think that's probably something that's a little bit hard for people to get used to.
And I think the problem with that is when people think that they're doing high intensity work, they're getting mixed up with percentage of output versus actual perceived exertion. Yeah. So rather than thinking, I'm working really hard and intent, I think the intensity is linked to how out of breath they are. So you look at workouts like, what was that one everyone does? The online one, everyone went mad for
the
it.
CrossFit one.
Not CrossFit, the bodyweight workout, what was his name? P60 and shit like that.
Yeah. Oh, Christ.
You get the idea. Anyway,
Insanity.
So they say it's high intensity training, and the guys are gassed and they're out of breath, but by definition, that is capacity work. Because if you can sustain it for that amount of work,
it's aerobic. It's pure aerobic, isn't
Absolutely.
it?
So people think when we're talking high intensity, they're thinking, oh wow, okay, it's 50 seconds of work, 10 seconds recovery, and that's what people think high intensity is. But by definition, it's not high intensity because the percentage of your max output that you're working at is so low to sustain that effort. But then when people have that perceive of what the output work is going to be, they come in then to do 6 seconds of work, 10 seconds of work, and they're working kind of at the same speed that they've been doing 40 seconds out, 50 seconds of course it's going to be easy. But when you can switch the emphasis to being more on trying to really produce maximal speed, maximal power, and it's not going to be you're not going to be gassed, you're not going to be out of breath. But if you're focusing on speed and force production, it's completely different. And if you were to do a max broad jump and then see how long it would take to get back to that base of level, if you had 30 seconds rest, you're not going to be able to produce a max effort broad jump again. In a minute, you're probably not going to be able to, but you'll be closer to keeping that same kind of level. So I think a lot of it comes from people's perceived perception of what high intensity is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're not going to go into too much depth on energy systems today because that can be a bit boring. But yeah, essentially what we're doing is trying to replenish the ATP and be able to produce more power. And if we're not resting long enough, then we can't really produce that. That's probably one of the biggest misconceptions in the industry is what actual high intensity training is. Like you say, it's it's kind of can come across quite sort of sexy terminology, and a lot of places will try and use it, whether that's coaches or gyms or anything like that. Right, we do a HIIT session, and it's like you say, it's like that kind of insanity style workout where you're working for 10 minutes non-stop, and then you're having a bit of recovery, and it's well, that, like you say, by definition, that's not actually high intensity work. You're working aerobically, which is fine, but it's just making sure you can determine the differences really.
I think it does take a couple of sessions. So when it is let's say an example is yesterday's session was a 10 meter max effort power sprint, and obviously 10 meters pushing the sledge is easy if you do it slow. It's not a far distance, you're not going to get out of breath. But if you're trying to maximally produce speed and power, push that sledge as hard as you can, it is taxing, and you need time to recover, or you're going to see that speed drop. But if you enter that 10 meters and push it at the same speed that you could push it for 100 meters, of course it's going to be easy, and it's not going to get the adaptations that we're after of the speed and power, where to work in those energy systems, you can't just work for 8 seconds and say you're working lactate. You need to be working at maximal output and these maximum speeds, 90% plus of your max efforts in terms of speed development is what's needed to get the adaptation that you're after from it. And I think that's sometimes a little bit missing. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, that's a really good point actually. You say, it might say on the board lactate work 8 seconds, but if you're working at an intensity which is aerobic and steady state, then it's aerobic. It's not, you're not developing the systems you're looking to. So yeah, certainly things to be aware of, I think, for listeners is when you're doing your conditioning work, just identify what it is you're trying to develop, making sure the timings are right, and then the actual output and intensity that you're working at matches that.
Do you think there's prerequisites to doing the lactate work? Because we all know that because it's output, like having a good base of strength and power is going to be really beneficial. So in terms of like these adaptations that we're after, the people that have got that kind of bigger strength level, bigger power level are going to be able to get a little bit more from the lactate work than someone that might have a bit of a strength deficit, but might be really aerobically fit, but might not be able to have the power to actually produce enough to maybe get out the...
100%. I think like that's the beauty of strength and conditioning as a holistic approach, like an overall approach, and why, no matter how much of a bias your goals might be towards conditioning, there's always a place for doing strength work, like always. Because like you say, if we're talking about like, output and alactate 6 to 12 seconds, as we know, the bigger the strength base, the more foundation we've got to produce power in those short periods of time. Yeah. Like I said, if we're doing a 6-second watt bike, max power output, obviously the stronger the legs are, the more power we can produce, the better response we're going to get, conditioning wise as well. Not to mention all the injury prevention or reduction risks from doing strength training.
Purely output,
just looking purely from a, we could go on all day about that, but just talking, linking it to conditioning just from an output point of view, absolutely 100%. If looking at conditioning as a whole, and like I said, your goals might be in your head purely conditioning based, and that's fine. That's no problem at all. But the benefits of doing strength work is you're going to get a lot more bang for your buck when you're doing your output stuff. And generally speaking, if you're well trained aerobically, that's going to carry over into your aerobic system as well.
I think it's similar to like when we talk about like your vertical integration. Everyone should be doing strength training, and 90% of people, 95% of people should be doing some kind of conditioning work. But obviously the dosages change depending on your dependency of your goal. Having like the ability to deadlift 3 or 4 times your body weight is at some point it's diminished returns to your conditioning. But having a good foundation where you can deadlift maybe 2 times your body weight at the deadlift would set you up with a really good foundation. Any stronger than that, if your goal is conditioning, might be better time spent on the conditioning, but having that little bit of a basis and foundation is a really good thing to do. So I think it's, again, like we said, with strength conditioning as an overall approach, some people are going to spend more time doing strength work with a smaller dosage of conditioning, but people's goals are to be really good at conditioning. You still need to have that little dosage of strength training to get as much as you can out of your conditioning work.
100%. If you look at a scale from, if we're talking about a goal or a sport that requires the highest possible maximal strength, we could have powerlifting on one end of the scale, and on the other end of the scale we could have marathon running, and then in between we might have field sports or just general people looking to be fitter, stronger, etc. And through that whole scale we want to be doing strength and conditioning on that sort of concurrent approach. But it's obviously if we're a powerlifter and we're very much down that strength end of the system, it's going to be obviously a lot less conditioning than the marathon runner, but the powerlifter still wants to do a little bit of conditioning work,
maintain some work capacity, keep up a decent amount of recovery in between. There's a lot of benefits.
Exactly. And on the other end of the scale, the marathon runner, okay, let's be honest, the marathon runner needs to do a lot of miles on the road. So are they going to have the same time and capacity to develop those strengths?
Strength training 4 times a week for 3 hours.
Exactly. They're having to hit a certain amount of mileage per week to obviously develop the aerobic system, make themselves robust, and conditioned to the actual output of and demands of running. But that little bit of strength work, once or twice a week is going to make a huge difference. And I think you'll probably admit, like on the powerlifting end of the scale, that's probably neglected a little bit by some, and certainly on the marathon side, the strength work is massively neglected. And then you have your guys in between. So like if we talk about field athletes, for example, I'll use my example of rugby. Like, obviously need to be strong, need to be powerful, but need to get around the park for 80 minutes, need to have a good aerobic base. So I might not have, it's all about diminishing, returns. Okay. It's like, yeah, absolutely. I should be hitting like certain strength standards, and, I'm always looking to push that. But at the same time, it's within the time frame that I've got, and within the, without, for example, like in the pre-season, obviously I need to build up a certain amount of conditioning, and it would be unbeneficial for me to sacrifice, let's say, 2 conditioning sessions a week to spend, 2 extra sessions on the deadlift to get that deadlift from whatever it might be to, 230 to 240 or 250 or whatever it might be. So, I might be able to put that extra time in to get those strength gains up a little bit, but I diminish the thing that, one of the important components of fitness and for the sport. We'll say things to consider. So we've talked about, go into a bit more fat loss and versus performance. I think that'll be a nice transition into that, really. So who's conditioning for? What are the benefits?
Sure. So I think with that, so people with default, if they've got a fat loss goal, a lot of people automatically think I need to be doing the metcons or I need to be doing conditioning work. First of all, they neglect the strength work. We've already spoke about the benefits of strength training. And if you have a fat loss goal, you would do well for trying to preserve as much muscle mass as you can while trying to drop body weight. The last thing that you want to do is completely neglect your strength work and just focus on like conditioning. Let's forget about metcon, aerobic conditioning. If all you do is aerobic conditioning, you do no kind of power work, no speed work, no strength work, you're going to lose a lot of lean tissue, and you're going to lose body fat, but you're going to lose lean tissue. And when people desire a certain look, they want to try and they do a good job of trying to hold on to as much of lean muscle tissue as they can. So when people say they have a fat loss goal, I recommend still trying to do your strength training, but also if I had to choose between one or the other, I would choose like a lactate, speed and power, output conditioning over just doing aerobic conditioning.
Yeah.
I think a combination of the two is absolutely great, but like we know the benefits of strength work, we know the benefits of speed and power work, and that's going to help you maintain your lean tissue while dropping body fat versus just doing 40 minutes on the bike or just doing your aerobic work, which is not going to do as good of a job to try and preserve your muscle mass. And it's very difficult to preserve / gain muscle mass in a caloric deficit, which is the most important thing for your fat loss. Trying to do your strength work and trying to do some speed and power work would be the best thing for it. The second thing to think about is from a fat loss perspective is people are looking at like caloric output of an actual individual session. And you could work as hard as you could in a conditioning session. Let's forget about the outliers and the 1%ers that are going to burn 800 calories, 1,000 calories in a session. Most people are going to burn 300 to 500 calories in a session, which is a chocolate bar. I would rather, James Smith always said that he'd rather not eat the chocolate bar and not have to do the conditioning. So if your goal is fat loss, you're trying to get yourself into a caloric deficit, which is going to take care of 90-95% of the fat loss. So then from there, it's trying to preserve your muscle tissue. And it's trying to keep up the speed and power limits, because there's a lot of benefits to that while being in the caloric deficit versus just doing your cardio.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think like you're fighting a losing battle there, aren't you? Pissing into the wind a little bit if you're going tit for tat and saying, right, okay, like I can eat that, and then I'm burning 300 calories in a session or 400 or 500. Got to keep going. You're probably fighting a losing battle there. Exactly the same approach for me. Like focus on being strong. Moving well, being powerful, etc., etc. Like from an aerobic point of view as well, like just perhaps on those off days, getting step count up, something very, very basic like that isn't going to eat into the recovery from the strength side of things can be a good way to go, really.
Well, if you compare like doing a session compared to accumulating 10,000 steps for the day, the 10,000 steps is probably going to do more of a caloric burn than it is going to be from doing the actual cardio session. So if you're looking for a fat loss perspective, increasing your overall activity is going to be a really good thing to do. And then it's trying to preserve and maintain these qualities that are going to help you achieve the look that you want. And even if you don't think that's the look you want, it is the look that you want. Like no one wants to be skinny fat. Most people want to try, when they talk about trying to get leaner, they want to maintain their muscle tissue.
Yeah. And
strength training and speed and power work is going to be a really good thing for that. And another thing to think about is as people get older as well, like people say your strength drops off as you get older. The first thing that drops off is speed and power. Mm-hmm. Like you see people in their 50s still hitting big PBs and strength movements, but you're never going to see a 40-year-old run the 100-meter PB. Like Usain Bolt's not going to, at 40 years old, break his 100-meter record. He's just not going to. So
I can confirm that speed drops off a little bit.
In terms of trying to reduce the deficit that happens from, you would do a good job to keep your speed and power working. Absolutely. So for older populations, again, that their preconception is, I'm getting a little bit older, I probably shouldn't be sprinting, I shouldn't be jumping. You absolutely should try to maintain that speed and quality as long as you can, and reduce the amount that's going to drop off. Just naturally do it as you get older.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it was I think good tweet I saw from Eric Cressy the other day who said about that, like, for once people get into their 20s, they just neglect that side of things. And this, why do we accept like a loss of athleticism for 75% of our life? And I think that's a really interesting thing. But yeah, 100%, like, train athletically, get strong, get powerful, do your speed work, do your high intensity stuff. And with speed training, okay, like naturally, like you say, you don't see 40-year-olds or 45, 50-year-olds like breaking 100-meter records, but we can still train those skills and try and maintain them as best as we possibly can, because if you stop, then you're going to lose it at a pretty fast rate.
From a fat loss perspective as well, so like we've talked about trying to maintain your like lean tissue and these speed and power qualities, which just improve your overall quality of life as well. Like it's the main thing is, I forgot what I was going to say there. The caloric deficit is the most important thing. You're not going to burn that many calories doing a speed and power, but it's just creating that overall deficit, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like you say, it's activity levels, isn't it? Like, I think it's getting people into the habit of, like, rather than looking at an individual gym session, right, how many calories I've got to burn, right, I've got to come in and I'm looking to lose a bit of weight, so I've got to work like 100%. I've got to work really, really hard for the hour. And right, great, I've burned 600 calories. Fantastic. I mean, like you say, you're much better off just looking at an overall approach, increasing your overall activity levels throughout the week, as well as not just hitting that one session.
Much like with a diet, like one bad meal is not going to make or break your prep, but the multitude of it is going to. I remembered what I was going to say. So I was going to talk about from like an aerobic perspective. If you just wanted to build up your aerobic fitness, rather than doing just the bike for 40 minutes 3 times a week, you're going to get just like any sport, you're going to get repetitive injuries from just doing that, as well as the monotonous nature of it. If you did like the kind of conditioning style we would do for your capacity work, your aerobic work, there's a lot more movement variability in there, which we know movement variability is great for reducing like these little injuries that happen from repetitive movements, but also just like that variability, it's just more interesting as well. So it's a chance to do some carries, it's a chance to do some single leg work, it's a chance to do some rotational work, and these are all qualities and movements that you should be able to do well, that you do lose from just doing like your kind of cardio piece of equipment for 40 minutes.
I think people do get confused with that. Like they're looking for fat loss or weight loss, and they're thinking, right, okay, yeah, I'm going to pick I'm going to do the bike or the cross trainer, or I'm going to run. I need to run, and it's like you say, like in terms of exercise selection, if we're doing the same thing over and over again, and as we know, we can get those repetitive type injuries, especially if we're overweight as well. Yeah. So like running's a big one for me, where like people will go 0 to turbo like within a week, and they're doing loads of miles, and they're overweight. They're weak. They're bad technique. The muscles, the joints are weak. They can't absorb the impact that road running is going to cause at the weight that they're at. It's a lot of impact. On the bike, it's less impact, but you're in that seated position.
You spend all day doing as well.
You spend. There's plenty of links and research with long periods on bike and hamstring injuries, for example. Like you say, you choose the bike, and it's like, right, okay, well that's great, but like you say, you sat down all day at work, you sat in your car driving to and from work, you get home, you watch Netflix and you sit down, and then you go to the gym and you want to sit down. That's always been a big one for me. And again, it's nothing against the bike. Absolutely throw it in. We use the bike a shitload in the Metcons and with our clients, but it's that variation. So I think this is a really good point of like, if we are looking for that weight loss with your conditioning, variations the key. It's
some
like
rotational work, some carries, some frontal planes, some absolutely, as much movement variability in there as you can is definitely going to be a good benefit to everything. Like you said, just avoiding this one plane the whole time is going to do great and do wonders for your body. Like I said, being on the bike all the time in that flex on over hunch position, your hips always in a little bit of flexion, compared to standing up tall and doing a suitcase carry, into a sledge drag, into a rotation with the ball. That's 3 different movements there that are going to have 3 different benefits. Getting your body into different positions is going to be great for you.
With that in mind, should we sort of move into a little bit more about exercise selection and talk about like skill aspects as well? Yeah. So in the Metcon, if we talk about like low skill versus high skill when we're doing our conditioning work, obviously we've got the bikes, we've got the rowers, we've got ski ergs, things like that you can go wrong, but it's fairly low skill, fairly easy to teach, easy to do. And with our Metcon sessions, especially when we're doing conditioning ourselves, we're big fans of keeping the skill level quite low on the conditioning levels. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. Like, one of the reasons is if we're doing high skill work under fatigue, then the risk of injury is obviously a lot higher. For example, like if we're the aim of a conditioning session, or the aim of a conditioning session can be to obviously accumulate some level of fatigue, whether it's a hard aerobic session or a lactate drill or anything like that. We are going to be accumulating some fatigue, and we're going to be getting tired. So the worst thing we can do really is in the middle of that session, throwing in highly technical movements that require a lot of demand from the central nervous system. They're quite hard to teach and to learn. They're very technical. Let's take, for example, a barbell snatch. We wouldn't put that in the middle of a conditioning session because it's it's a very high skill movement. And if we're doing that after doing, a load of sprints on the bike, or we're doing, a run or a prowler or anything like that, and then we go into a snatch, because it's such a technically, you've got to be so technically efficient in the movement, with a bit of central nervous fatigue, positions can go out of place. We're not as efficient in the movement as we'd like to be. We're not going to produce as much power as we'd like to anyway, because we're fatigued, so it's kind of a bit pointless. And because it's a highly complex movement, then again, the risk of something going wrong is a lot higher.
Like you said, there's the injury thing there, and you touched on it slightly. Was if you give someone a snatch and they can't perform a snatch very well, the actual output's just going to be so low anyway that you're not going to get the adaptation you want.
It's kind of pointless, yeah.
Versus doing something that, a hip extension exercise that's a bit more simple, like an overhead throw or kettlebell swing.
Yeah.
You're going to get so much more of the adaptation from there because you can perform it really well. So,
and you're repeating bad habits as well.
Yeah.
Like say if you're doing that highly complex movement under fatigue, it's pretty obvious to know that positions are going to be slightly out. And the more we're doing that, the more repetition. It's practice doesn't always make perfect. If the practice is poorly done, it's like it's got to be done well if we want to get to that perfect stage. So repeating bad habits and bad movement patterns is going to affect the skill negatively.
It's the same so if you look at the low and the skill and the high skill, there are some movements in there that are higher skill. They're not the Olympic lifts in terms of technical demands, but like a broad jump is quite a technical thing in terms of trying to optimize your landing, optimizing hip extension. But we wouldn't do a broad jump in a capacity session or in a tough anaerobic session where you cut massively out of breath. We would do it in the output session where you're doing about 6 to 10 seconds of work and you've got a full minute to recovery, so you're never actually accumulating that same level of fatigue. So there are some exercises there that are higher skill, but we try and keep those for the output section where it's trying to maximize your performance, maximize your speed and power. So then stuff like sprints at like top end speed, jumps, some kind of throws as well. We do those in the output, and then the capacity where Mark said about accumulating the fatigue and working under like builds up of lactate, building up just like a heart rate, which then is going to make you really fatigued. We keep the exercises super simple. So even if you look at like on a continuum, the highest skill, which is still in the grand scheme of things lower skill than what you did for like Olympic lifting or for strength training, are going to be performed in the output section, and then your high capacity work is going to be super low skill. It's going to be pushing a sledge, dragging a sledge, ski erg, bike, and you really can't do them wrong.
100%. And like as you say, we're not going to the level of like Olympic lifts and snatches and things, but there are some relatively technical movements like moderate, let's say like trap bar jumps, box jumps, broad jumps. Anything that's kind of jumping fast, explosive, and like I said, I think one of the ones that's quite hard to watch is when people do like repetitive box jumps for like 100 reps and things like that.
Just clearing the box at the last.
And it's like it's a great exercise, but it's put into the wrong context. That's a power output movement. By all means do it, but let's just put it in the output section, in the alactate section. And like I say, when we move into capacity, so for example, like some of our aerobic blocks, we might be doing like 2 minutes to 6 minutes or 7 minutes without a rest. We're pushing hard, and that accumulates a hell of a lot of fatigue. Then we want to make the skill level as low as possible. Let's march with a prowler, let's drag a sled, let's be on the bike.
The injury risk of dragging a sled run is zero. Pretty much zero.
Pretty much as close to zero as you could possibly get, Whereas if you're doing like 6 minutes of, box jumps into broad jumps,
it's a fucking snatch.
into snatch. Yeah, I mean, we laugh, but like people do it. So it's like I say, that kind of exercise selection and low skill versus high skill is important. It's important to note and take into consideration. So, like I say, I think to summarize that aspect in terms of conditioning, we would never go super high skill.
Yeah,
we'd go maybe moderate to.
The exercises that we choose for those, which what you're trying to say is you can teach them in 10 minutes.
Yes.
You can teach someone to do a bull jump in 10 minutes. You can't teach someone to do a snatch in 10 minutes. So they're very moderate. They're easy to coach. Yeah. And once you've done a couple, you're
high output, like tough on the CNS, like jumping is tough. But let's put it in the right context. So let's say the more demanding movements we can do for the shorter periods of time at as higher output as possible. And then the capacity work where we're looking just for, aerobic capacity, just good solid goat work. We're looking at as lower skill as possible.
Because another thing to think about is, like you said, where if you're doing like a 2-minute max effort, imagine that last 15 seconds and you're just like, right, max effort box jumps, let's go. You're going to fucking go shin first. You're going to do a Carl Sargent and go shin first into the box. If you're doing 2 minutes max effort on the bike, that last 15 seconds, you can go absolutely ham. Your position might be slightly compromised, but you flexing your back on the bike compared to really flexing your back trying to do a snatch is a completely different kettle of fish.
100%. Make life easy for yourself. And like you said, if it is that capacity and, the idea is like, heart rate focused, as much capacity as hard as we can. Like you say, that aerobic side of things, right, we can push 15-20 seconds left. Like you say, if you're on a bike, okay, like we might not be in a perfect position, but we're not going to hurt ourselves. It's okay. Let's push it, let's work hard. Like you say, if it's box jump, if it's snatch, if it's like something like that, you're asking for trouble. You're asking for trouble. I think take the skill into account.
In regards to exercise selection, what's your opinion and what do you use for like our blocks of training? So like, do you quite like keeping exercises the same for a certain amount of weeks, or do you like to alternate the reps? Alternate the exercises, but keep the rep schemes around the same? Because with our Metcon, similar to what we spoke about with our barbell, we typically have like normally around a 4-week block for the Metcon, where we're working towards some kind of goal / testing on that last week and kind of a bit of a push to kind of gauge where we're at. And then every 12 to 16 weeks, we do some performance testing. So we're checking everyone's improving, and these performance metrics that we're keeping is like a 10-meter sprint, a prowler sprint, a 100-meter roll. We're making sure that people are improving. So I think that's good for motivation, and it's good to make sure that you're getting good adaptation to the speed and power. It's fun. Absolutely. Yeah. But do you like to alternate the exercise, or do you prefer to keep them the same?
So with the conditioning block, as you say, if we're looking at an average of 4 weeks per block, personally, I'd like to keep the exercises as similar as possible. There's a little bit more flexibility. If we're talking about strength training, in a strength block, normally we'd work 4-week block, sometimes 5, 6 or whatever. With strength training, we're looking at more technical movements. 100% rule of thumb, we keep the exercises the same for that 4-week block before we move on to other exercises. The reason being is we want to develop the skill of the movement. We want to give ourselves enough time to build towards an adaptation. We spoke about intro weeks before. Week 1, let's say it's a back squat. Week 1 might be 3 sets of 5 at 65, 70%, 6 RPE. Then we want to push on. Now, if I'm doing the back squat week 1 and then I'm changing it to a front squat, or I'm changing it to something different week 2, I'm not giving myself enough time to develop the skill and the familiarization, and therefore get enough out of the exercise in terms of intensity and volume to create an adaptation. With conditioning work, I like to keep a fairly similar rule of thumb. There is a little bit more room for maneuverability. Okay, so for example, if I'm running the Friday morning conditioning session, most of the exercises most of the time will be the same for the 4 weeks. And again, similar reasoning behind that as it is with the strength work, where we want that familiarization. Let's say we put in a tire flip on week 1, for example. With that, again, another important thing to mention, if we're doing something like a tire flip, it's quite technical. In the conditioning sessions, again, we'd use that for very low repetitions and not fatigue ourselves. But not to go off piece too much there. But if we're learning the tire flip week 1, and it's the first time we've ever done it, I don't want to change that week 2 because there's so much room for growth there.
By the time you come back to the tyre, you got to learn it again.
You've got to learn it again. So I would normally stick, I say, with strength work, pretty much 100%. I'd keep the same exercise selection for 4 weeks before changing. With conditioning, 80 to 90%, I would keep the same. So for example, if we change, if we take a sledge push and change it to a sled drag, or the subtle variations, it's okay as long as we're working the same energy systems and the same sort of timings, and progressing in those aspects week on week. That's what we're looking for, really. But in terms of exercise selection, as I said, not quite as strict as strength work, but generally speaking, I'd like to keep the same for 4 weeks so we can familiarise, improve. Because, sometimes we go from week 1 to week 2, and someone goes from dragging a 60 kilo sled to an 80 kilo sled, and they might think, I've got way better condition. And it's like, well, you might have got a little bit better condition, but you've actually just got a bit better at the skill. And it's the same with a tyre. It's the same with a tyre. It might go from 100 kilo to 200 kilo tyre or whatever. And it's like, you've actually just familiarised yourself with the exercise. But if we change the exercise again week 2, you would never have lifted that 200 kilo tyre. And there is, people think with exercise selection, sometimes we've got to change every day. We've got to do something different. We've got to, do that sort of work out of the day type thing. And it's like, well, you're leaving a lot on the table, because by doing week 1 and doing that exercise, we're familiarising ourselves. And week 2, we're getting the stress and stimulus and therefore the adaptation by simply changing the weight, because we're better at it. You don't need to change the exercise. We need to change, in terms of adaptation, we can change exercise, intensity or volume. Now, changing exercise all the time is useless, because you don't get better at the skill and give yourself the capacity to get better. If we change intensity, and volume, that can come from just learning the skill. We can do a little bit better. And there's your stress, there's your stimulus, there's your adaptation. You don't need to change the exercise.
Well, like you just said, that's one of the flaws with a lot of the research, is to have that, they come in, they'll do a familiarization session. The next session, they do some testing, then they do it again 4 days later, and they've improved their strength by 10%. And it's because they've got familiar with the exercise. And like you said, from an adaptation perspective, if you're learning exercises every week, obviously at some point you're going to know all the exercises if you're quite advanced and done conditioning all the time. But like you just said, once you're familiar with exercise, you're familiar with the protocol, your output on that next week 2, week 3, week 4 is just going to be so much higher than if you're forgetting what you're meant to be doing, or if you're not quite 100% of doing an exercise and you're focusing so much on actually performing it rather than just actually doing the exercise. You're going to get so much more out of it. And you touched on it on the last one, again, time and a place of when to rotate and when not to. So much like with your strength work, because it's high skill, you keep the exercises the same. It's the same with the output section of my conditioning sessions is the same every week for 4 weeks, because last week we did banded broad jumps. First week of doing it, people are figuring out where does the band go, how do we do it. Week 2, they're going to be more familiar, and it's a chance just to really develop that skill. And as your skill improves, your output's going to improve as well. The adaptation is going to be a little bit better. The capacity side of things, where it's your longer periods of work with shorter recovery, I'm going to have more rotation in there, because some people need the variability for the enjoyment elements of it, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like you said, as long as it's still working the overarching concept of what you've set the program to develop, there is definitely room for that. Similar to with normal strength training, as you kind of get more specific as you get towards your goals, it's the same with the conditioning. We've mentioned that we do performance testing to make sure people improve in the ways that we want them to. When we're getting ready for performance testing, which I said is every 12 to 16 weeks, that last block is going to be highly specific to developing the lift we want in. Because if one of the testing is a broad jump, if we're 2 weeks out and we're doing vertical jump, or we're doing something that's not even joint angle specific to a broad jump, then we're not going to get that same outcome as if we'd spent the last few weeks doing broad jump. So as we're getting close to testing, we're a lot more specific, and we're keeping the exercises the same. During the output, we're keeping the exercises the same, and really focusing on developing them. Capacity, there's definitely more room for variation.
That's a great rule of thumb for any sort of training program, isn't it? You're going from almost your general to your specific. So it'd be the same with your powerlifting, for example. The further away you are from a comp, there's that bit more room for variability in exercises. We can mix things up a little bit more as we get closer towards competition. Then obviously we need to be a bit more specific, and that's the same in a weightlifting program. That's the same in a rugby program, et cetera. So in a weightlifting program, we might be doing loads of snatch work off the blocks, 12, 16 weeks out. As we come into 8 weeks out, 6 weeks out, then we're doing snatch singles off the floor or doubles and getting used to the full movement. And like you say, same in conditioning, especially if we're working towards some testing, then we want to start being a little bit more specific.
What is so we've kind of talked through the high skill, the low skill, what we're trying to do in terms of the progression. You mentioned about you don't have to alternate the exercises as long as you keep them within the overarching concepts. How do you progress them week on week?
Yeah, so if
do you even progress them?
Yeah, I think you're looking to progress them. I think with like, you know, general pop with like low to medium experience, like you can progress technically without actually changing anything, because like I say, the skill level gets better. Like naturally, they're just going to put a bit more output in. They're going to become more familiarized, more confident, etc., etc. But generally speaking, like, yeah, I'd look at, you know, improving the volume and increasing the volume and the intensity throughout a 4-week block. So for example, like if we're doing a, you know, let's say a prowler sprint, for example, we might be starting off at, you know, 30% of body weight. Next week we might actually go to 20% of body weight. Then next week 10% of body weight. We're looking to increase the speed stimulus as we you know, as we go through the weeks. If we're looking at capacity, for example, you know, we might be building from a 4-minute bike to a 5-minute bike to a 6-minute bike, or we might be just keeping it the same and saying, guys, aim to improve on what you did last time. Yeah. That can be a way of improving capacity. And in terms of you know, jumps and things like that, okay, we're not necessarily looking at measuring, you know, a jump every time we do it, but we might be looking at again, you know, altering the amount of volume we're doing on it, or maybe we're going from like, you know, a broad jump where we're looking at the real mechanics of sticking the landing to sort of after a few weeks or a couple of weeks, let them go and say, right, max effort. And we might even go to a triple bound or something like that. Yeah. So again, that's where like you might, not to contradict myself, but like go into the exercise selection. That's where you might just put a little spin on it and tweak that.
Yeah, you've not gone from a black to a white. You've gone from a broad jump to a bound. Like yeah, it's not completely.
Yeah, exactly. So a way of increasing like your banded broad jump might be from going from that into a broad jump without the resistance.
I was going to add 10 bands.
That could be another way of doing it, yeah.
Really resisted band. I think another
the jump would be fun, but it would be more fun is watching people ping back. Yeah,
yeah. Like them blow-up centres where you're trying to get the fucking thing at the end and then you get pulled back.
Yeah.
I think you touched on it slightly, but I just wanted to say as well, like keeping the goal is key when you're trying to progress. Like you said, your output is based around improving your output, your speed, your power, and your capacity is about building capacity. And I think you need to keep those goals in mind when you're looking at your progressions. So if you're doing output and you're adding volume to it, so you're like, okay, week 1 is a 10-metre sledge push, then week 2 is a 15-metre, then a 20. All of a sudden, it's becoming more about capacity and less about your actual power output and your speed output. And the same can be said about capacity, where you might say week 1, we start at a minute max work, and then next week we do 50 seconds and 40. And all of a sudden, there's this grey area where they're kind of merged into both. Yeah. So I think with your output, you're trying to progress the output element of it. So you're trying to increase the intensity. So by nature, by definition, the speed you're working for has to stay down or even reduce. So people think, oh, week 1 was easy, it was only 10 metres. And then next week might be 8 metres. And it might be more rest to try and facilitate, trying to get more speed. And that might seem like counterintuitive to people, but when you think that the aim is to improve your speed and power, actually allowing more recovery, even though it's going to be easier in terms of like how gassed you are, it's going to be better in terms of producing your maximal speed.
Yeah.
And it's the same with your capacity. If you're trying to improve your aerobic base, trying to increase the speed can be a great thing, but actually as well improving the distance is maybe at least as good of an option. So you're either trying to improve the amount of work you do within a certain amount of time, or you're looking to progress the amount of work, but you're never looking to really reduce the amount of work. Because then it's becoming a bit more output focused. So.
Exactly, yeah. It's just having good clarity in your goals, isn't it? Like you say, you know, a simple, you know, capacity, you know, thing could be like with a prowler. Let's say you put your body weight on top of the prowler. Week 1, you say, right, go guys, you got 2 minutes to hit as much distance as you can. And then next week it might be as simple as beat that distance.
Yeah, and don't change anything.
And therefore, you know, like say, if you're looking at like capacity, you might not want to reduce the weight or increase the weight or anything like that. You might keep all those variables the same, and it's just beating the distance. Yeah. Or it might be like, right, we're gonna go for a minute 20 or a minute 30 or 2 minutes.
Or you might have 2 intervals and then just reduce the rest in between.
But like you say, if you're looking to improve, you know, speed on the bike, you're not going to go from 6 seconds to 8 seconds, 10 seconds to 12 seconds, because you know it's not really what you're trying to improve. If we're looking at like weighted sprints, for example, like, and we want to improve speed, I'm not going to like just keep adding weight. I'm not going to increase distance from like 15 to 20 meters. I'm going to keep all those variables the same, and I'm just going to reduce the weight weekly, very slightly, and gradually, so that the speed improves week on week. So again, it's like there's lots of things to consider, but let's say general rule of thumb is like, right, what's the goal? And then it's like I say, exercise selection can be the same, or it could be like a very minimal, progression. Like I say, it could be ballistic, like standing broad jump, week 1 and 2, and then it could be triple jump week 3 and 4. That's fine. That's enough. It could be like, it could be counter movement jump. We could be pausing in the bottom position before we jump up. So we're going like, we're adding an isometric component. Then it might be, right, okay, we're going to go, we're going to dip and then go. So we're adding like the elasticity of the eccentric component. And then it might be repetitive bounds. So that's a real simple way of saying, right, I've got 4-week block with, a field athlete. That's how we're going to progress that output aspect of conditioning. Pause, eccentric, repetitive, reactive. That might be a simple way of doing it. So it doesn't have to be overly complex. Again, you don't have to be changing exercises every session. Just those very subtle variations, and
keep the goal the goal.
Keep the goal the goal. Yeah.
So I guess the last thing to touch on is when, like looking at the research, looking at what you would do with clients. When are you programming and conditioning? When are you pushing it? When are you easing back? When is the best time to do it?
I think like it's one of the key things really, in terms of like, it's just getting your timing right with these kind of things. So like, if we say, let's narrow this down to 3 options. Let's say, right, okay, you can do your strength training one day, you can do your conditioning the next day, then you can do your strength training the day after that. So you do one day on, one day off. Another option might be doing it in the same day. Okay, where you're splitting the sessions to, let's say, AM and PM. So we might be doing some strength training in the morning and some conditioning in the evening. And a third option might be doing it in the same session. So you're doing like, 50 minutes of strength work and 10 minutes of conditioning at the end. So, the key is that like, anything can work in that respect. It's just making sure that we know what the, taking into account the goals of the client, the work schedule, how many times a week they can come to the gym.
If you say AM and PM and they're working, they just actually can't do it, so it doesn't matter.
Exactly. And intensity, exactly. You might, and again, I think this is like an absolutely key point of coaching is like your preference might be like, one of my big preferences is AM, PM. Like I love like the aspect of, let's say on a high intensity day, we're doing like some sprints in the morning and we're doing some gym, some heavy lifting in the evening. But that, that's my favorite approach, but that's not going to work for, some of your clients. That's not going to work for everyone. So I think like the first thing to consider is, again, that individuality and how everybody's different. And we need to consider the whole picture before we, start picking.
It's much like anything. It has to fit your schedule. It doesn't matter if I say, the best protocol is strength in the morning, conditioning in the night. If you have a young family or you want to go home to your partner or just want to go home and have some downtime, it's not going to work. But all things being equal, then the research does say a couple of different things. So ideally, if you had the time to do it, the best thing you can do is separate your strength training from your conditioning work by 24 hours. So doing it on separate days is the best approach if you can make that work. In terms of like the interference effect that people talk about, it is absolutely minimized if you can do it on alternating days. There's a few things to think about when you're doing that. Is like, if you're doing conditioning on a Tuesday and then strength on a Wednesday, you want the conditioning to be set up so that it's not massively conflicting with your strength work. So being easy on the eccentrics, not going crazy with the volume is probably going to be a good idea. But all things being equal, doing
24
hours is the best thing. The next best approach is AM and PM. And another thing to think about there is what is your priority is probably the one that you should do first. So if your priority, if you're a marathon runner, you should probably do your run first and then your your strength training after. And if your priority for most people is strength and then your conditioning, you would do it in that order.
Yeah.
And then the last option, which has the biggest interference, would be your session and then conditioning after it, or vice versa.
Exactly. As I say, and then it's just taking all those things into account, isn't it? Like I say, if you can split those and do, say, have that 24 hours in between before you hit your conditioning, you're going to get a bit more bang for your buck. You're going to be able to perform at a little bit of a higher level, really. If you're if you're a field athlete, for example, I like the AM PM because there's a lot to fit in. There's a lot of strength, a lot of conditioning, a lot of skill work to fit in, and doing that on the same day and having your high days and your low days works really well. So
a really good example of that is if you watch I love the basketball at the minute, but the basketball, they finish a game, they go backstage and they're in the weight room. Yeah. And they're condensing all their high day into a massive high day. And then the day after, they're taking a low day or a recovery day. They're condensing all the work into that high day, like you just said. So your AM is hard. The next one might be a low day where you're trying to facilitate recovery. But
exactly. Yeah. So for example, I might run a low day on a Monday, which might be, if I'm doing up, sometimes some blocks I'll do uppers, lowers. Some days, some blocks it's full body, but let's just say uppers, lowers. On a Monday, I might be doing upper body weights. In the evening, I might be doing a tempo run. Now, it's really important when I do that the tempo run is at a low enough level that it's not going to interfere with my performance the next day with the higher day. So my tempo run, I'll be making sure my heart rate's in a certain area, making sure it's not going too high, so it's not eating away at my recovery. And then the next day, I come in and do a lower session, which is high intensity, along with some sprints or some form of alactate work. So I might come in the morning and do sprints, and then in the evening you're doing your weights. Obviously, that's quite a demanding schedule, but then on the Wednesday I can have the day off. Some very low level recovery.
And the important thing you said there is on that low day, so what we said with your conditioning is you're not looking to massively improve on your low day. Your low day stays low the whole time. We're not looking to add volume. We're not looking to add speed. We're looking to keep the heart rate nice and low. So if all of a sudden you start trying to improve your low day, it's going to get blurred again into a medium day, let's call it.
Well, that's it. Yeah, I think hopefully not divulging too much into field sports here, but it's if you're doing that low day on the Monday, for example, you do your upper body weights. Now, no matter how hard you push your upper body days, it's, if you're just doing uppers, it's going to be pretty low. And then you go into your evening tempo run. Now, if you start doing suicides or broncos and things like that, and they are great tests / training tools in their own right. But all of a sudden then we're working, anaerobically, we're hitting some lactate, the recovery process becomes longer. And then all of a sudden I'm trying to come in the morning and I'm trying to do some sprints, or I'm trying to do some deadlifts or something, higher output and higher intensity, because I'm so tired from, overstepping the mark in the lower days, then I'm not going to produce that same output. And then the whole training process becomes kind of pointless. Or at least we're not getting anywhere near
the most adaptation.
What's the point in kind of, trying to do that high day if you're nowhere near your capacity, you haven't got the engine to do it. So by definition, then it's not a high day, and everything just merges into this grey area where every day is a bit moderate. We have a decent, conditioning session on that Monday night, which is pretty good, but then we're too tired then to actually do a good broad jump the next morning, or a good sprint, or a good deadlift, and that's kind of average. Then we have a day off on the Wednesday, which is kind of average because we feel a bit shit because we've trained too hard in the 2 days, and then we go back in, and that cycle can roll on and on. So I think that's, if you are doing your 2 a days, which again 100% agree with Luke, and the science is there in terms of the recovery. If you can do day on, day off, that's ideal. But like I said, from a field athlete point of view, sometimes we might have to go into those two a days. Then just make sure that you're having your high days and your low days. So on the low days, we're still getting a lot of good work done. We're building aerobic base. We're doing some upper body work, or maybe if it's full body, we're doing some accessories. So we are improving, but we're just not tapping into that fatigue. Into that fatigue too much, so that when we go to the high day, we can't produce the kind of output that we want to, really.
And then I think for your everyday person that can't go to the gym twice a day, which is, let's be honest, 80-90%
most people,
yeah. Absolutely. Doing it back to back is absolutely not a problem as well. I would just say that, like, if you're looking at the research, like trying to do a big session and then going back to the gym the day after is going to be quite tough. So like you said, make sure if you're going in the day after to do a low day, or if you're going to do another hard day, maybe go Monday, Wednesday, if you're going to be doing 2 hard sessions. Because you look at like the research on training to failure, it's normally about 48 hours to get back to a baseline of performance. So if you're pushing conditioning hard, you're pushing your strength work hard, the day after is going to be tough to do. So if you're combining them both together, I'd say 48 hours before you're doing another hard session exactly the same again. On that note, what do you think about like the interference effects? If you were looking to, because we've said that everyone should have a combination of the two, what do you think about the interference effect if you're trying to develop your strength of doing conditioning, and vice versa if you're doing your conditioning and doing some strength work? What do you know about the interference in terms of the research, what you've seen with your clients, anecdotally, yourself?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think like, again, it's taking everything into consideration. Like, how many times can we get, like say, if we've got that marathon runner and we're trying to smash 4 gym sessions a week and trying to do 4 strength sessions, that's going to be not the ideal way to do it. So again, just like the implementation of just understanding the outputs, how hard we're working, how easy we're working, what energy systems we're working, etc., whether it's a big heavy compound day, whether it's accessory work. I think that's all to be taken into consideration, really.
So what you're saying is the poison is in the dosage.
The poison is in the dosage, absolutely. Well, if we go back to like what we were talking about earlier with the scale of like your powerlifter at one end, your marathon runner at the other end. Now, with a like, let's take a powerlifter for as an example. For your aerobic work, for example, like that might be a case of like on getting your step count up, or on one of your off days, factoring in that you can do a bit of hiking, for example, if maybe if the next day is not that heavy, etc. And like say with a marathon runner, it's just being a little bit careful of like, right, okay, I've done my big 15 miler, on a Sunday. Do I really want to go in and do the heavy stuff on a Tuesday? So yeah, it's absolutely like, it's all down to dosage.
Absolutely the dosage. My opinion of it is like me wanting to be the best powerlifter I can and doing a little bit of basketball, doing a little bit of hiking. Me doing that at such a low level where I'm not trying to become the best basketballer in the world. I'm not trying to become this mad hiker that's training for the 3 peaks. Me doing a little bit of that and then really prioritizing my strength training, it's going to be a very, very, if any, minor effect. I don't think any effects, but let's say 1% for the sake of the conversation. That compared to me saying, I really want to be the best powerlifter and I also want to be the best basketball player and I want to do the 3 peaks and I want to break the record for it. Then when you're competing in both of them, it becomes really difficult. If I wanted to do running, which I absolutely don't, but if someone wanted to like, I don't know, do a 10K, if I could train for a 10K and still powerlift, and I think it'd be very minimal effect on my powerlifting training. If I then said, I want to win the best 10K time in Birmingham, it's going to have an effect because the amount of effort it's going to take to then become the best runner is going to take away from the effort of powerlifting. If you want to do something leisurely, and if your main focus is on strength or on marathon running, and then you do a couple of strength sessions a week if you're a marathon runner, and it's at such a low level where you're not coming in like a powerlifter and doing 3-hour sessions of squats, really pushing the volume, really pushing the intensity. You're doing it to complement your marathon running. It's going to have a positive effect from everything, but it's not going to have a negative effect on your marathon running. But if you were a marathon runner and did 4 times a week strength sessions, it's going to interfere with your training as well as taking away from the time you're actually doing the marathon running.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is dosage, isn't it? Like if I have a game on a Saturday, for example, and then, I'm running up and down, Snowdon on a Sunday, that's a level of hiking and, aerobic stuff that is going to be way too high, that it's going to impact my recovery, and I'm going to be battered on Monday and Tuesday.
You go to Shropshire for a leisurely lunch and a nice little walk.
Exactly.
It's going to have no effect.
It's going to have no effect.
You having a walk with your partner on your wife on the weekend is going to have no effect on your rugby training.
Yeah.
But you trying to sprint up Snowdon to break the record and do it in an hour is going to affect your training.
Yeah. So, dosage, intensity. And like I'm massive on, like, I love the fact that like you've got into basketball, for example. Like I love that because it's like, powerlifting's obviously the number one priority and the goal, and nothing's going to stop you from pursuing that. But it's like I'm just a big fan of like having other interests and things. I think it can be like a real mental thing, like where, you go and play basketball and for half an hour, you can forget about powerlifting.
Yeah.
You can forget about work. You can forget about anything.
And
like
when
that.
I'm playing basketball, it's a couple of leisurely.
It's like footballers play a lot of golf.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely. But that golf will take away from them.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's that slightly different stimulus, very low level aerobic recovery type work.
Let's say when I'm playing basketball, it's like a couple of games of horse and maybe a little bit of one-on-one, just low level. I'm not trying to like be in the NBA. I'm not trying to train that hard. It's there for enjoyment. It's there because I enjoy doing it. The dosage again is the key thing to it. Yeah,
100%. And another example is like a new client taken on recently is doing like Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. And he's like, what should I do on that Wednesday? Should I be, smashing at the gym? Should I be doing this? And I'm like, absolutely not. What I want you to do is I want you to hit X amount of steps. I want you to go out for a walk with the missus. I want you to get out and get some fresh air. Or and then it gets to his weekend and it's like, right, okay, we're just gonna monitor the food a little bit and we're gonna I said, that you've worked bloody hard during the week. We've done some, with him, it's like the goal was actually weight loss, but the majority of training is strength and power and speed type work. And then I'll say on the weekend, right, on one of the days you're gonna go for a walk. He likes getting outside, likes hiking and stuff. It's like, right, go out for a low level. I say hike. I mean, probably not that level, but like
walk to the reservoir.
Well, yeah, exactly. Done a lap of the reservoir. So it's like, right, on one of those days, I want you to go and do that.
Sure.
And the other day, do what you want. Like just have a chill. Have a day off. Exactly. So you're getting him to do conditioning on his days off, but it's at a level that isn't going to destroy him and tap into his recovery, etc.
Big time.
Boom. Happy?
Say no more.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Fantastic. I think that was. I think we covered pretty much everything we wanted to there. So we'll wrap it up, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed that podcast. That was a fun one.
I guess the note I'd like to end it on actually would be that like the Metcon sessions are fantastic. They build general conditioning qualities and they're great for the majority of people. They're great for everyone further away from competition. If you're a sports person and you require specific conditioning, you've got specific demands, probably doing the Metcon when you're in season isn't going to be the best idea if your sport is sprinting or if your sport is like a field sport. So again, like it's making sure that the goal stays the goal and that the work that you're doing is based around that. So I guess I'm saying that like the Metcon sessions are fantastic for everyone, but if they're not specific to your goals as you get close towards something, then maybe that's the time then to kind of ease back on it and make sure the conditioning you do is specific to yourself. My example is I've just done a 6 week block of doing your Tuesday night Metcon. It's been great fun first and foremost because it's different, and I think like conditioning in a group environment is just so much nicer than going out on your own. But my sort of off season was like starting off with some tempo runs, like just to build a bit of tolerance and just keep something, once a week, just keep some form of running. And then this has just been a really good opportunity to like go beyond the aerobic, side of things and tap into a bit of anaerobic, bit of lactate, some extra power type stuff and work bloody hard. Sticking that on a Tuesday night. So I'll come in Tuesday morning, I do like fairly low volume, high intensity, hit some big lifts, give myself as close to 12 hours as I possibly can. And then hitting that hard session, and I've got the Wednesday off, and then Thursday's a low day anyway. So it's like, I've not got my next high day till Friday. So I've got, 72 hours recovery there. And it's like, that's a great opportunity and small time frame where I can get 6-7 weeks of like high intensity conditioning in that isn't going to affect anything else and carry over really nicely before I start, pre-season next week, which, will be Tuesday, Thursday nights and probably Saturdays as well. And then all of a sudden you've got to start being a little bit more careful where that's going to be my high days. So like at most conditioning wise, I'll be doing one tempo run a week and that'll be fairly minimal. In season,
I normally don't do any, but I like at most I might do game Saturday, active recovery Sunday, and Monday morning might be a low level tempo run.
It's like once a week. If you're a runner and you're getting ready to run the 10K and you're competitive and you want to run it the best time you can, doing Metcon 12 weeks out would be a fantastic idea. 4 weeks out, I'm not sure if it's the best idea to do. That's kind of just to clarify on that point. So using them as and when needed. But then as like I said, things should be getting more specific as you get ready for your competition or your season. So just taking that into mind. But if your goal is just to be as best conditioned as you can, then the Metcon will nothing beat it, because the amount of work you're going to do in a group compared to being by yourself is massive. So if your goal is to be really good at conditioning, the Metcons are unreal for it.
Yeah, I'd say, like I'm pretty self-motivated with my training and my conditioning. I actually enjoy conditioning work, but for me, like doing it in a group compared to on my own is a huge difference, to be honest. Like,
so if you can train in a group, push yourself an extra few percent.
Boom,
there you go.
Get yourself signed up for the Metcon Games, and we'll catch you next time.
Cheers, guys.
Boom.